Thanks for returning for another episode of Rational Discourse Weekly. This is episode 39, filmed on Wednesday, March 25th, 2015. I'm William Garrison.
And I'm Randall Wilmore.
I don't know who that is. That's
okay, fine.
actually Michael Aune.
Hello.
We're just going to chat a little bit about a documentary that CNN aired that talks about atheists. And it's pretty interesting, but it leads us into some lines of conversation about the history of atheism and where it's going in this country and others. And
So stay tuned for Tales from the Atheist Crypt. Crypt. There's a T on that, isn't there? There is.
Crypt.
Is it crypt? It's crypt. Anyway, Tales from the Crypt. Tales from the Crypt, I guess, would be like the guy who's not a blood. I'm a terrible announcer. Thank you. Stay tuned for what follows.
Well, first of all, wanted to talk about CNN, and they had a documentary on atheists that aired yesterday. It's called Atheists, A Look Inside the World of Non-Believers, I think is what it's called.
I believe that's the case. I was only able to watch the first 6 to 10 minutes or something like that at work today, but from what I can tell, it's going to be a melodramatic mess of a special.
A couple of points, like most specials, it's like 45 minutes of actual video. It's longer than that because there's a lot of advertisements, but basically they cover a variety of stories. So they start off with following a guy that goes to school in North Georgia, actually.
In North Georgia College.
And his parents are devout Christians. And it basically goes from both sides of the coin. It talks about his activism, the fact that he's regularly involved with the skeptic group at his college.
Yeah, they showed him on campus setting up with another student or two, and they were...
Yeah, they do an Ask an Atheist day where they sit at the booth for a few hours, and people come around and talk to them about whatever, and they just try to have, debate isn't off the table, but obviously they're trying to keep it relatively friendly.
Yeah, they were giving out condoms and cookies. I think it said...
Yeah.
Was it sin is not real, but STDs are?
Yeah.
And just trying to get sort of awareness. I think it seemed like the goal was to give sort of a public face to atheism, because especially in North Georgia and anywhere outside of Atlanta, really.
You're in the Bible Belt.
It's thoroughly in the Bible Belt. Jesus is a gun-toting, redneck-loving, probably beer-chugging, though I don't know if they'd highlight that point
right
publicly.
So interesting when they interviewed and talked to his parents about how they felt about him coming out as an atheist, and is something that the dad said, and it was basically that he was realizing that his son, he was talking to a dead person. That's what he said.
Yeah, because his soul is lost, right?
And then when he was confronted by the reporter, he said to the reporter, he's like, "That's not me saying that. That's scripture." And that's a defense that he frequently used when they would talk about the relationship with his son.
Yeah.
And
I know at the very beginning when they are being introduced, they were asked, what is it that you did with your children? How did you raise them? And then they're like, well, they were supposed, good God-fearing kids. And they're like, so, what do you think happened? And he's like, well, we weren't good enough, obviously. Which is interesting because I feel for the guy, because I'm sure he genuinely holds this belief that he let his child down, which has got to be very troubling. And yet it's coming from sort of this arrogance, this assurity that you are right and he is wrong, without potentially trying to meet in the middle, understand that if this kid was raised this way, was this immersed in the culture, and still rejects it, maybe there's something to that, especially since the presence that the kid had. I guess I saw more of this section than any other. He seemed perfectly, nice. He was,
I think
thoughtful, kind of quiet, without he wasn't boastful. He wasn't.
Yeah.
He carried himself like a nice young man, and to look at that and feel like a failure as a father or as a parent, it just struck me as both patronizing, like how could my now adult son possibly know anything I don't?
I think the father may not know how common it is for people raised in a religious family to leave.
I mean, my roommate is one of them.
Yeah.
His dad's a Southern Baptist minister, or has been for many, many years.
Yeah.
And, apparently one day he was sitting in church and just looked around and sort of was like, had this moment,
Where am I?
this moment of falling out of faith, not like coming to Jesus, but slamming the door in his face a little bit, and
Right.
just like, I can't. What is this? What are we doing?
They actually, later in the documentary, they speak with, I think we've probably mentioned the Clergy Project before, but they speak with a minister who, in the middle of a sermon, he had slight doubts before, but he was reading words on the page, and he was realizing they were bullshit as he was reading them.
Yeah.
And he said it was the most shocking and like destroying feeling that he had ever felt, because he had dedicated his life to the church.
Yeah.
And his world was crumbling around him. Because then, the group, by the way, has over 600 members, people that lead churches, lead prayer, and don't believe in any of it. And it's because they're
trapped. I mean, this is the
Yeah.
thing that they've trained for, many of them. They've dedicated their life to it. Their entire social structure is
they're in
built
a
around
community.
it.
They've helped people. Basically, if they leave, especially if they don't do it tactfully, they
Could invalidate all the good that they've done, even if they did it perhaps for what we think are like the wrong motivations.
yeah.
They were at least trying to be good people, and that's totally fair. I'm fine with that. And then the mental, like, cognitive dissonance and just emotional anxiety of feeling trapped must be awful. I mean, I'm lucky enough that I don't have any close relations to where I feel like I would have let anyone down by not believing. I didn't have that tension at any point in my life. I'm dealing with it a little bit now because my girlfriend is quite devout. She's a fairly recent, I guess she's not technically a convert, because I think for a while she just wasn't active in church. She was a teenager and didn't care, and then in college sort of reconnected after some tough times. And, there's a tension there because I have to try and be civil about a thing that I pretty vehemently dislike. So there's no doubt that this lack of faith within a social structure or coming to be different from those around you, it causes a lot of stress. I mean, and I've only had to deal with it in one way, and it's been fairly, tactful. We've been pretty good about it. We've only had one real, like, serious discussion, and we ended up, I think, in a good spot. So it's, the thought of, like, your wife, your kids, you've led them into this, all your family and friends and your congregation, and that's gotta suck.
And then when you go back to work the next day, you've got to read out loud from a book that you believe is false, and you've got to sound like you mean it. Because I don't know if you've heard a lot of sermons, but they
conviction is important.
Yeah.
I think that, let's face it, if you read those words tentatively, there's no one in their right mind who's going to buy into it.
And Jesus
half
said
of
unto them?
Yeah.
Question?
Jesus? Jesus? Yeshua? Because I guess that would actually have been his name in Hebrew.
Yeah.
So, by the way, when you're talking to Jesus, he doesn't know who you're talking to. Imagine if you were the creator of the universe and no one got your name right. Dear Jesus. It's Yeshua. It's like Joshua, but like Hebrew.
Just call me him.
Can you call me J-Man or like
Man
J-Money?
upstairs.
At least a nickname?
Robed man.
It's a terrible nickname. Like, maybe if you're the pedophile, like, down the street,
man.
and the little kids in the neighborhood are like, don't go down there. That's where the robed guy lives. Yeah. No, Jesus doesn't want that
He'll
nickname.
disappear in those robes.
And then that kid was never seen ever again.
But one thing I liked about the documentary, aside from its, and again, Michael hasn't seen the whole thing yet, but I was able to watch it.
Some of us have jobs.
Actually, my girlfriend and I watched it on the way into work. I had my phone mounted, and I was more or less listening, but she was watching. And
I'm sure there were some thrilling visuals you missed of demonic atheists eating small babies.
But one thing I liked is that the reporter didn't really lead into anything. She didn't paint atheists in a certain light by leading them questions into making them seem like bad people. She was basically just asking where they were coming from, how life was. She was very open. She didn't ever express her own beliefs, which I think is sometimes a mistake. I'm not going to say always, because it depends on the subject matter and like how you're
how
phrasing.
it's being presented,
right.
yeah.
But in this kind of special, I think it was good because it showed that she was trying to be unbiased and show both sides. So,
I mean, I did get the feeling that this was like the tone, like the music for like the cues going into the different segments, and even the way that she sort of phrased the questions. It did feel a little bit like she thought this was like a little bit scandalous, like we're gonna go into the seedy underbelly of like
the tagline, was
strip clubs, and it was like, no, it's just atheists, but they made it. I mean, of course, it's trying to grab attention, but I got this vibe even from just the way that her tone, the way her cadence.
No, I agree. The tagline was that atheists are one of the most hated minority groups in the U.S. Here's why there's such a stigma behind the name.
That's
right.
for sure.
I've seen some polls about trust, like which of these groups do you trust the most? We don't do well there.
No, we're down there with Muslims.
And so what I liked about this documentary is it painted atheists in a fairly good light. It
didn't seem to be trying to demonize them. I mean, and I've actually read more about it and more commentary on it than I've actually watched, which is weird. I guess it's easier for me to read at work than to toss on a video. But the overall impression was kind of like it was sort of naively done. Like, it wasn't malicious, but it just didn't quite get it.
Well, the reason I liked it is because average people that don't know much, if anything, about atheism will watch it, and hopefully they'll understand a little bit more about the different types of atheists, because they have a couple of clips with Richard Dawkins,
who apparently came off fairly, like, calm, mellow, like he wasn't...
Yeah, they didn't do any of his crazy clips, like, it's science, it works, bitches. Like, nothing like that. But there is a clip at the beginning where they're like, what do you say about... I don't know, they say about parents who complain that their children are atheists or something, and he's like, they should get over it. He says something like that, but he's in a very like clean way.
Yeah, I mean, he comes up. Like, I get the complaints about Dawkins. He's an intellectual and he's smart, and he obviously is at some point just offended by the crap he has to answer, the stupid questions, or the ridiculous questions, or the comments that are thrown his way. It's someone who's tired of defending a thing that has been defended. Like, I mean, and a lot of this is coming from his work as an evolutionary biologist. Cause that's really where he started. And through his work, he also became known as this other thing, which is sort of an advocate for atheism. But
which
he's got a tone. I mean, he's got even his voice. I can see why, like, it's easy for him to grade on people. But I've asked him several times, I'm like, have you actually really read, though, or listened to what he's saying, not necessarily how he's saying it? Because he's very committed to not overstating a fact.
Yeah.
In all of his books, he hedges everything if it needs to be hedged. He admits ignorance on a topic, but at the same time, he's willing to put his foot down and say, like, well, this is where I feel that I can draw the line, and it's okay to draw lines. I feel that a lot of people, we tiptoe so much about religion. Well, don't draw a hard line there, because then if there's a line in the sand, you can criticize people on the other side of it. And it's like, well, no, some positions deserve to be criticized. And it's not a settled question that religion is not one of them. It's absolutely not a settled question. So, I don't know. I always find it interesting when Dawkins is brought in, because he's a polarizing figure. And yet, what he actually says, I mean, other than the fact that sometimes he just sort of will give the dismissive answer, he is actually quite. He's got his image in many ways doesn't actually match with what has been said, and I think Sam Harris in many ways is the same way. It's easy to try and find something that you can pull a sentence or two out and say that he's like this radical atheist, and
Like the clip with him and Ben Affleck where he was saying that Islam is a mother lode of bad, I think is what he said.
I mean, his position on Islam is
yeah.
that it holds particular beliefs in such a way that it is more readily able to get people to enact vicious physical violence and emotional harm and societal harm on others in a way that Christianity is not. Now, a lot of that is probably historically based. Islam was born during war. I mean, this is when Muhammad and his followers were conquering, and then in the 150 years after that, the Islamic Empire, as it was, the Caliphate, was conquering constantly. So it is a religion born in war. Its imagery is in war. And so, yes, there's very easy to take those things and translate them to actual war. Even if, benefit of the doubt, it was meant to just be a way to relate to the people in a society that is warlike, that is accustomed to conquest. And so Harris gets lambasted by Ben Affleck in that, like saying that and he was equating Islam with Muslims. That was the big fallacy that Ben Affleck was doing.
And we've mentioned this several times that ideas don't deserve the protections and rights that people do. There's a difference between
Absolutely
saying
correct. Beliefs are not deserving of respect.
Yeah, I can say
people are by being people.
I can say something you believe in is stupid without equating that to you being stupid.
Yeah. The fact that you get hurt by it because I am attacking a thing you hold dear is different.
It's understandable, and to be tactful, if we're not having like a scheduled debate, I need to consider that when we have a conversation. I can't just say, hey, that thing you believe is stupid to a stranger on the street.
Yeah.
Because that's me just being an ass.
It's a better debating tactic, right?
Yeah.
You want to show respect because you can then gain respect, and if you have respect, then people will actually potentially take what you're saying with some weight. You can actually deliver a message and people won't dismiss it as, oh, look at that asshole spouting off again. Which is why I get why people feel that in many ways atheism is too vocal in like attacking. At the same time, we are the minority, and the minority, in general, has to push back in a way that the majority doesn't. You get to sit there. I've got to fight against religious encroachment.
We have to remind
those sort of
them
things.
That the norm isn't always right.
Yes.
It's the same kind of pushback. I'm not equating atheism necessarily. There are probably similarities. I'm not equating it to the civil rights movement, but there are... It was that same sort of pushback. You had to say, hey, what is normal is not right.
Yeah.
This may be accepted, but I'm saying it needs to change, and here's why.
Yeah. Well, at some point, it is tiring
forces a
to
discussion.
have to...
Yeah.
I mean, so I get it. I actually... An analogy to this is like my relationship with the quote-unquote social justice warriors. Now, I use that term only because it's easily identifiable.
Yeah.
But if you are involved on the internet at all, you probably know the group that I'm roughly talking about. Now, it's used at this point often as a derogatory way to dismiss an argument. I don't intend to use it that way. I'm just trying to sort of get a vague idea of where we're talking about in the spectrum. But, if you go onto a lot of these posts or blogs by people who would be considered active in this, many of these people are in groups like transgender communities or gay communities where they are actually persecuted for who they are. Most of them are young, let's face it. I mean, I think at this point it's safe to say that probably most people who would be self-identified with that sort of ideology are probably 30 and under. And so I think there can be sort of just a disdain that comes out in that, and an exhaustion of having to constantly defend yourself or constantly being harassed, which comes out as being nasty. And yet, there are valid points there, so it's not good to just dismiss the position because the person is upset or tired of explaining this to you. It's not my job to explain this to you is a common thing. Like, if I want you to call me by a certain pronoun, for instance, it's not my job to explain to you why that should be okay. And so when you're tackling issues like this with groups that are under pressure, I think it's easy for people to get upset about constantly having to explain something they shouldn't have to explain. And I understand that.
Yeah.
Atheists, though, I think are too easily dismissed, like many groups, because of what's considered a few loud or obnoxious voices, when in general, what's actually being said is not bad. It's not attacking in the same sense of, all Christians are idiots and should be burned at the stake for believing such a heinously false belief. No one's really saying that. But we are poking at something that people hold dear. And so that emotional aspect is something you have to keep in mind. Even if you are emotional on your end because you're having to explain this for the 48th time, or someone has not been kind to you, as Jesus said, turn the other cheek, man. And that's a great tactic in a sense, because the moment you fall into a caricature of the group that you are trying to either disassociate yourself with or trying to redefine in someone else's mind, you've lost the argument.
The tactic that I like, I think they talked about this with the kid that goes to school in North Georgia during their Ask an Atheist Day sessions. One of the common things you do is don't assume the other person believes in something just because they're Christian, for example. Yeah. If someone's a Christian, you can't assume that they believe the earth is 6,000 years old. That's a subset of Christians.
Yes. Core Christianity, just like atheism, is almost an empty term. It means very, very little in practice as far as nailing down what someone believes. If you're a Christian, the only thing I can say is that you have some relationship with Jesus. You might not even believe he was necessarily real. I know people who consider themselves Christian who do not care about the actual historical validity of the story. I don't know. Apparently something I said sounded like, okay, Google. Okay, Jesus?
Can't you change it?
Jesus?
I think
okay,
you can
Jesus?
say it to say, okay, Jesus.
No, not on stock Android.
Oh,
It's a feature of the Motorola series of phones on which this one is based, but is sadly not something I can do with this.
One of my coworkers, he says, Blue Eyes White Dragon, which is a Yu-Gi-Oh card, evidently.
Apparently.
And when he does
Sounds
that,
like a Yu-Gi-Oh card.
When he does that, in that voice, it launches his OK Google.
Apparently, a very common one, I think it was around Google, actually, or maybe it was around Motorola, actually, for when the first Moto X was being announced, was OK Jarvis. Because who doesn't want Jarvis to, do all this shit for you? That'd be amazing. Anyway, we should probably get towards wrapping this up.
Anyways, the documentary's good. It's not great, but it's at least a step in the right direction.
It's weird to find something like this on CNN during prime time. This is what, Cooper Anderson?
Anderson Cooper.
Anderson Cooper.
Cooper Anderson is like Bizarro.
Yeah, he's bizarre. He has a small mustache. He doesn't have white hair. He has black hair.
It's obviously better than some.
No, wait, it's a goatee.
Something that would have been on like Fox News.
Actually, I would love to see Fox News do that special. Yeah. That would be amazing. I'd have a field day with it.
But I think we're slowly heading in the right direction. The more airtime we can get so that the average Joe can at least hear about atheism and not automatically assume that we're devil worshippers, I think is a good thing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they say hate cannot survive proximity, right? It's easy to hate someone you don't know when they're the caricature of the thing that you hate. But just like forced integration during the civil rights movement, there was a big reason for that. And I don't think it was just strictly to be like, all right, now look, people are mixed. But also exposure to this culture that you don't understand will soften your view of it. That's, I think, the natural way of things. And so the more that we feel that we can be vocal about our positions, I mean, if it's okay to stand on a college campus with a sign that says you all burn in hell, and you feel fine doing that, it should be okay for atheists to do the same in whatever way that they so choose. That ability to feel publicly accepted, or at least feel that you can open up to the public and engage with someone and start to break down those presumptions that they hold about what atheists are like or what you would be like as an atheist. That's going to be the critical move, right? And I think that will also then open the door for other people to say, oh, there's something here that maybe resonates with me. And so I think there is going to be a snowball effect as there's more publicity about what atheism is, what atheists are like, and the fact that, and again, atheism is vacuous. Literally tells you one tiny, tiny, tiny fact about a person.
Yep.
So yeah, are there asshole atheists? Of course. There's the bell curve of humanity represented in atheism, just like there is in Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, agnosticism, you name it. Some people are shitty, some people are awesome. Most people probably fall somewhere in the middle. You know, they tried their best, they're not perfect.
We just hope that the hump is closer to one side than the other.
Yeah, we will hope it's leaning a little, it's a little maybe good heavy. But again, the more that atheism is less of a dirty word,
yeah,
and that you can openly take that name and title and associate yourself with it without feeling that you're going to end up persecuted, and the more that then, as an atheist, as part of your identity, but an important part of your identity for some people like us, if you can start to be in that public space, I think it will start to turn the conversation more quickly. And the more socially acceptable something becomes, I think the more that you will then see it come out. Just, 40 years ago, you couldn't really be openly gay almost anywhere in the country. And now, as people have had more exposure to the idea, as more people have become comfortable with the idea, it's easier for the next person to come out and claim that identity, and that feeds the cycle of speeding up acceptance. I mean, look where we've come in 15 years on that issue. We went from DOMA, the Defense of Marriage Act.
Yeah.
That's already been struck down. We've got gay marriage legal in more states than not. We've got a pending Supreme Court case that a lot of legal scholars are thinking will finally strike down any state bans on the issue. We did that in 15 years, 20 years.
Thanks, Ellen. Ellen DeGeneres. She came out in the 90s, and I remember that was a pretty...
Yeah, I mean, at the time, and you know what? Now it's totally not a thing. Yeah. And in some cultures, it already wasn't a thing, but it's more and more not a thing that people care about. I think atheism will have that moment. Yeah. We will have that period where it no longer matters, and it will be more readily accessible to people who have not been able to claim that mantle, but maybe feel that way.
Yeah.
But because of the way their family feels, history, whatever it is, have not been able to take up that mantle. So hopefully we're at that point where it's no longer a bad word, I guess, is what we want, because it's not. It means nothing about the person, but you should be able to say that openly and without fear of the way society will judge you. So
it should be a conversation starter, not an ender.
Yeah, it shouldn't mean that, oh, well, I no longer need to talk to this person.
Yeah.
So hopefully we'll get there soon. So per the usual lately, we're going to say that we're going to be back soon. It's been crazy again. You've moved again.
Yeah, I live like an hour and a half away from work now.
Which is unfortunate.
So it's pretty awful. But we may have found some other options, at least good night options. So we'll see.
Yeah, but we still love this. We still want to do it.
Yeah.
For any of you who have actually kept up with us, I mean, I know it wasn't many to begin with, but thank you. We, love that you have, and we still aim to be here to discuss these things. We both love it. So stay tuned. Don't de-Twitter us. What is it on Twitter? Don't stop following us.
Unfollow.
Don't unfollow. Okay. So bye until next time, whenever that may be. We're going to stop promising things.